Good evening. The news this week has been not so much dominated as obliterated by the Syria debate. People have been demonstrating about it, MPs have been speechifying about it, demands have been made for absolute clarification, for exit strategies, for peace talks, for there to be no mission creep. Assurances have been made about the almost precise nature of the benefits to be expected from action. So as ever, the process is varnished with a precarious certainty. People expressing or demanding certainty about issues and policies that are anything but certain. In that sense, the debate is like so much else in this cacophonous world. There is so much going on, so much at stake, so many voices, that we increasingly demand moral certainty to guide us through the tangled forest. Take the issue of rape, where we have moved from defining rape as someone saying no, to defining it as when someone doesn't clearly say yes. There is even consent training at colleges to teach people on how to recognise a yes. Or child abuse, where we define anyone who has had or who may be attracted to having sex with anyone under the age of consent as a child abuser. Or the Islamic hardliner who doesn't believe that Muslims should be allowed to renounce their faith, who may now be defined as a proto-jihadi. The value of this blinding clarity is that the moral horizon is unclouded. We know where we stand, and knowing that may protect some from harm and help us make decisions. But is the danger that it ignores the essential messiness and ambivalence of being human, that it turns clarity into tyranny and makes ordinary people into what they're not, that it posits a level of assuredness that is actually dishonest? That's our moral maze tonight. Our panel is the former Conservative Cabinet Minister Michael Portillo, Claire Fox from the Institute of Ideas, Anne McElvoy, who's Public Policy Editor of The Economist, and Matthew Taylor, Chief Executive of the RSA. Matthew, what are you most uncertain about?
Oh, I'm uncertain about lots of things. I spend most of my time actually trying to work out what I think about stuff. But in terms of the conversation we're having tonight, I don't think certainty or doubt are absolute virtues. It all depends on context. But if I had to choose, I'd rather we had political leaders who trusted us with uncertainty and doubt, and I'd rather our public discourse was about the complex things that unite us rather than the simple myths that divide us.
Claire Fox, are you a doubter or a certaintier?
I think that you have to have a certain amount of self-doubt, but it can be utterly irritating when you have people who spend their whole time in the middle of existential crises and can't make their mind up. So there's a kind of balancing act. But I am worried at the moment about a kind of set of dogmas, orthodoxies, almost heresies that you're not allowed to ask questions about. So in that sense, I want to explore the virtue of doubting scepticism and freedom of thought to kind of ask some awkward questions of the certainties that we're told are certain and not to be questioned.
So you're certain about the need for doubt?
I am indeed.
Michael Portillo, would it be fair to characterise you as somebody who was certain and is now doubtful?
No. I think I've always been doubtful. But I did serve a conviction politician in the shape of Margaret Thatcher, and I thought she provided an excellent framework for good government. But also, I think that convictions need to be treated with great humility, because I think actually what we regard as solid moral principles are very much influenced by time and place. They change with geography, they change over time.
Anne, are you a conviction journalist or an analytical, doubtful journalist?
Oh, just a marvellous journalist. But I'm actually going to defer to Bertolt Brecht. He has a great line in his poem In Praise of Doubt when he says, "Greet with cheerfulness and respect the man who treats your word like a bad penny." And I think that's very good advice to journalists, conviction-driven or otherwise, and to us all, because I think we use doubt, I think, best when we use it to test our own arguments, but not in a way to be utterly constrained by that. I think we have to come to conclusions, so I'm still going to err on the side of being a conclusive thinker.
Thank you. Well, our first witness is Katie Hopkins, the columnist, TV personality and controversialist. She has as many Twitter followers, I reckon, as the death toll of the American Civil War. It's roughly that kind of level.
A jolly comparison there.
Katie, certainty is kind of your thing, isn't it?
Yeah, I love certainty. I love being secure in my thinking about something. I love the idea, and I think it might be slightly motherhood that does this to a person as well. I like the idea that my children are clear about the direction I'm taking and the direction I would require them to follow until the age where they tell me to stuff off.
Matthew Taylor, your witness.
Do you think, as your writing often implies, that the world can be pretty much divided up into good people and bad people?
Yeah, I do like to think the world can be divided into good and bad, and I take examples around me, and then I'm proven wrong on occasion, of course. I was drawn into a kind of sadness of despair after the attacks in Paris, and I just felt the world around us was turning into a dark and depressing place. A Russian jet had just fallen out of the sky. Hundreds of English and British tourists were stuck in Sharm el-Sheikh, which I didn't really mind too much about, actually. I was rather happy they were stuck there. And indeed...
Can I just go back just a little bit? You said that sometimes you've changed your view. When you change your view about people that you've previously described in rather negative terms, do you feel regret about that?
Well, I'll just go back to where I was going, which was that a Russian jet fell out of the sky. We had the Paris attacks, and I think there was actually a national sense, I believe, of kind of gloom and a sort of a feeling that maybe we were losing what it was to be British and losing something about ourselves, that we were all under attack. And then I had a little fall, and lots of people came to look after me. I was lying on the road, and there was a canopy of umbrellas above me where people were holding out umbrellas to stop the rain, to let the ambulance crews work in the dry. And I was kind of reassured that actually, no, we are good people. This is a good place. Britain is a good place to be. But I'm certain of my view that, for example, ISIS are bad people. I do certainly divide the world to good and bad, yes.
But as a polemicist, you're paid to make people angry. So does that mean you think there's a shortage of anger in the world?
I think that would be a very naive way to describe me, that I'm paid to make people angry. I think what I do is I have a certain gut reaction to a circumstance, a happening, and I give a sense of, I articulate how I feel about it, and 50% of people will say, well, she's outrageous, she's ridiculous, she's the most obnoxious woman I've ever heard of. No, I don't want to be anywhere near her. And actually, 50% of people might say, it's nice, it's refreshing to have someone who can still speak out, who doesn't feel that we must be all terribly BBC, that doesn't feel
but 100%,
that debate can't be allowed anymore.
But 100%, I sense, you would want to see the issue more clear, in a more clear-cut way.
I didn't understand the question.
So whether people agree with you or disagree with you, the 50% who agree, the 50% who don't agree, what you like to do is to say there's a very clear dividing line.
I like to be very clear about where I am, if that's black or white, whichever of those colours.
So can I just ask you,
I like to have that black or white opinion, and I like everyone else to fill in the grey. The nuance I leave to others.
Do you have any sympathy for the famous advice given by Atticus Finch in To Kill a Mockingbird, that before you judge someone, you should put yourself in their shoes?
Absolutely not. I like to make an instant judgment. I haven't got time to waste really putting myself in other people's shoes. I like to make a quick judgment, and usually that judgment turns out rather well. Now, on occasion, I think, no, actually, I'll give this one a try, because obesity is something that I really care about. I put on 4 stone and lost it again, 50% of my own body weight, in order to walk in their shoes. So if we want to attack me on that, I'd suggest I'm quite committed to doing that on occasion.
For some reason, Katie pointed at me when she put on 4 stone. And Michael, you're witness.
We'll talk about that later. Your issues.
Are your views always sincerely held, or do you sometimes produce them for entertainment?
No, that would be shocking. I'm occasionally rung by certain radio stations in order to, when they're looking for someone with a view, and I always say, no, hold on, don't tell me what you're looking for, I'll tell you my opinion, because I'd much rather be consistent.
May I just ask you,
after over 10 years of radio, Michael, you would appreciate I would have been caught out by now if I'd been inconsistent.
A bit of to and froing is required. Do you defend against tyrannical orthodoxy sometimes? I was thinking about the position you took over Dolce & Gabbana, which Elton John wanted to boycott.
Yeah.
Did you feel that in supporting Dolce & Gabbana you were defending against tyrannical orthodoxy?
I didn't necessarily support Dolce & Gabbana, actually, if you read my article carefully. What I did do, though, was I suggested that perhaps it wasn't always necessary for people that describe themselves as tolerant, the LGBTQ community, who describe themselves as exceptionally tolerant. Why call for a boycott just when you don't like someone's opinions? Opinions are not... I'm just going to finish, actually. I'm going to finish, Michael.
But to the point about whether you're defending against an orthodoxy?
Yeah, but opinions can't be right or wrong. They're just views. And you're not an exam invigilator. And therefore I said, why not accept other people's opinions?
Do you ever have trouble sleeping at night? Because you get quite a strong reaction to your views, don't you? Do you suffer from what people say about you?
No, I don't have trouble. I'm a nocturnal epileptic. That gives me some trouble sleeping at night. But as for my views, no, I sleep very well with them because I feel honest about my beliefs. I feel like I articulate them well. And I feel that I do represent a vast swathe of the population who feel that they no longer have a voice because their voice has been kind of silenced by this absolute requirement that we are multicultural Britain. And I think for a lot of people, they don't feel that way.
You know, I think I quite value people who speak their own mind, but just in speaking to you now, the thing that worries me about you is your what appears to be a tremendous complacency. You're so self-satisfied with your own position. Do you not think that might be a disadvantage?
No, not at all. I think actually it's quite a strength. I do believe that so many of our politicians these days are populist politicians. They want to be loved, and I don't need to be loved, actually. I'm a conviction woman, and if people hate me, I'm actually very comfortable with that view. I don't need to persuade people around to like me. And what we see all of the time, of course, is someone stating an opinion. There's an enormous backlash, often on social media, and immediately, a day after, people apologise for the position they took. And I think that's very wrong. Either you meant what you said or you didn't. And I'm, I think brave enough to say, I meant what I said. You can say what you like, but I'm going to stand by it.
Katie Hopkins, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you very much indeed.
Our second witness is Andrew Samuels, who's a psychotherapist and a professor at Essex University. Welcome, Professor Samuels. In your psychotherapeutic practice, what do you think of the use of the word should?
You know, people do come with shoulds in their head, whether they come from parents or society or whatever. And a lot of therapy is about getting rid of the shoulds. But, the people who come with shoulds are riddled with secret doubt as well. So when I hear a should, whether it's in therapy or in public life, I think, well, are you as committed, convinced as you appear to be? And that's the kind of tension you play with in therapy.
Would you ever use the word should?
Not as a therapist.
That's what I wanted to know.
Not as a therapist, no.
Anne McElvoy, your witness.
Well, Immanuel Kant, to just give one example of a great philosopher who's probably guided an awful lot of our thinking one way and the other, does have a big should, doesn't he? He said you should live by the golden rule, that you should treat others as you'd wish to be treated yourself. And it's a big idea, which a lot of other moral imperatives spin off. Was he wrong to entertain a should in that sentence?
Don't you think that the key thing is the relationship between a person or a group and the shoulds, rather than should we have a should or shouldn't we have a should? It's something interactive between people and the things.
No, I think he means just that you should do it.
Yeah, well,
I think he really thinks that would be better than not doing it, and I suppose that's what I'm asking.
I'm interested
interesting
in the way in which categorical imperatives actually stop people from being who they are. That's what you meet in clinical work all the time. And you actually do see this in society. I'm not saying there should be no rules. I'm not soft on wrongdoing. But I am really concerned by the degree to which people are persecuted by the list of shoulds that they have in them.
Well, just step back a bit from what you're saying in therapy. What does it tell you really about how we should treat morality? Is it endlessly relativistic? And if we should never... Sorry, there's all sorts of shoulds breaking out here. But if we should not permit ourselves to say, here is a line that we do not cross, here is something bad, here is something good, wouldn't this end up with a very flabby kind of ethical framework that you might not be so happy living in?
I've been thinking a lot about conscience lately, because I think that's what you're talking about. And I've come to the conclusion that too many people regard conscience as like a set of instructions for an IKEA flat pack assembly. It's not like that. It's something that evolves over time. People can reach very definite moral conclusions about all aspects of life. I haven't got a problem with that. It's the process whereby they reach the certainty that interests me. And I think it's a question of testing out what you're taught. Surely, as a journalist, you would want to be somebody who tests out what you're told. That's what you're supposed to do.
I certainly would, but I think what I'm worried about is I'm wondering if you're ever going to come to a conclusion. Are you going to be able to say, and I'm just going to throw this at you as an example, it's around at the moment, if we're looking at something like destructive extremism, form of ISIS or its manifestations in our societies, are you happy just to say, no, this is wrong and here are the steps that I want to take about it, or are you more interested in the process? Because that would seem to leave you in a very open-ended position.
I don't think that being interested in the process means you don't reach a definite conclusion.
So you do reach a
it's
conclusion.
it's just a completely false opposition. It's the quality of the journey you travel to reach your decision that's important, and that's actually, by the way, practical politics as well. This is not.
Who's the judge of the quality?
This is not.
Who's the judge of the quality of your arguments?
The people who've been involved in it.
Claire Fox, your witness.
Actually, your flat pack analogy sounded rather Kantian, I have to say. He's the one who said don't follow the instructions. But in some ways, I wanted to take a little step back and just ask you, just very, why do you think there is a desire for certainty? What drives that? And it has to be quick, but what's the driver for wanting black and white morality?
It's easy.
Right.
It's easy. You just heard how easy it is. And it's seductive, and you've heard that too. And it's deeply dangerous. It's nasty, especially to people who don't have as much control over their own lives as they ought to have. So I think that you've got to think about the context of it.
So, but one of the things that obviously you've alluded to is the confusion, or rather a kind of the possibility of a confusion between doubt and inquiry and that process that you talk about, and evasion, and avoiding making any judgments. I mean, there is a sense in which people can be free from... They don't want the responsibility. They want an easy life.
OK, let's talk about soft options. I think the soft option that we really should engage with is knowing in advance. I think knowing in advance is a huge problem, because if you know in advance and you can't listen and you can't be spoken to and you can't dialogue, you get into a stuck situation.
We might agree on that. I'm asking you if there is a danger of being evasive and taking an easy option that won't make a decision, that actually tries to refuses to make judgments. At least our previous witness, to be fair to her, makes judgments, and she stands on them. We can hold her to account for that.
I mean, I think it's a cheap shot, actually, against people who try to think things through, to say, well, you're soft on bad things, you're soft on evil, you're soft on wrongdoing. I think, as I say, that the easy way out is to know in advance, or, and this is perhaps the worst thing of all, let someone else sort it out for you. That scares the shit out of me, to be quite sorry, but it really does. Right. And that actually is
excitement in the audience.
Yes, I know, but it's what you can see happening around the whole Syria question at the minute. People are struggling. The population, citizens, are struggling to find ways to think freely and not to think how they're being told to think.
It's also the case that it is actually very important for young people, for society, to have leaders who believe things, not just to have people who, as our previous witness said, will apologise as soon as somebody shouts at them and tells them they're saying the wrong thing. I mean, in that sense, conviction and belief in an idea can be admirable, important.
With all due
respect,
Claire, don't you think the world in its history has had enough of leaders who lead from the front and know everything and tell people what to do? Brecht, who's been quoted, said, "Unhappy is the land that hath need of heroes," and he meant heroic leaders. I think that productive politics is about getting people to think for themselves.
OK, Brecht's one of my heroes, by the way.
Good, mine too.
Bring the irony
Excellent. Andrew Samuels, thank you very much indeed. And we should note that it was the professor from Essex who used the four-letter word in a programme that had Katie Hopkins in it. That's quite some doing. And our third witness is Ben Harris-Quinney. He's chairman of the Conservative Bow Group, the United Kingdom's oldest conservative think tank, it says, founded in 1951, which frankly doesn't sound that ancient to me. But anyway, he's always said that he wants to return to principled conviction politics. Ben Harris-Quinney, don't we have conviction politics now?
Absolutely not. I think we're still very much living in the era of Tony Blair. The heir to Blair is our Prime Minister, and I think Tony Blair defines the era of centrism, populism and third-way politics, certainly in the modern British context.
Michael Portillo.
Does it strike you that some of our heroes from history, like Abraham Lincoln or Palmerston in this country, would have had views on gender equality, homosexuality, abortion, adultery, that would have been closer to ISIS than they would be to our opinions today?
Yes, I mean, and I think actually that's often forgotten about when we consider these historical figures. You know, Abraham Lincoln is undergoing a period of popularity, I would say, in the modern era, and yet those elements to which you refer of his views are often left out of that consideration, which I think is a shame.
What I really mean, though, is the broader point that what we might be very certain about today is really just a product of time and place. I mean, even in our own time, you know, what is regarded as a sort of centrist position on abortion, adultery, homosexuality, gender equality, has changed enormously. So shouldn't we be suspicious of what appear to be firm convictions?
No, I don't think we should, because in what you're saying, you assume that the values that we have today are supreme. And I think...
No, I was trying not to make that assumption.
Well, the assumption is that the views of Abraham Lincoln and Palmerston and other figures are therefore, because of their proximity, as you say, to ISIS, they're therefore problematic. I think we can't possibly know what the future holds in terms of values, and I don't think the values that we hold today are necessarily the best values that the human race could possibly achieve. I think actually Britain's best days are behind it, unfortunately. And therefore I think there is something of an arrogance of now in the way that we view past figures and ourselves and our own position in the world.
Now, that's exactly what I wanted to get out of you, that point of view. And, you know, who knows where we may be. I mean, it strikes me that many of the arguments that are used, say, about homosexuality might, in the future, who knows, justify incest between brother and sister. Why not? You know, if people want to express their love for each other. Couldn't that be a way that we go in future? Might we not be shocked by our present views?
It could be, but I think, you know, one of my favourite paintings is The Dance to the Music of Time, which shows a very cyclical arrangement in society and culture and in civilization. And I think, as you refer to a more permissive future for society, I think it's equally possible that we see sort of a return of a Victorian era chaste approach.
No, I entirely agree with you. But then my point is, why do you admire people with convictions when you're admitting that the convictions that they hold may be will-o'-the-wisp, may be very temporary, maybe, you know, change completely in years to come?
Because I think the era we live in today, it's not that it has such a particular direction, is that it has very little direction. I think that is the foundation of historically the foundation of the breakup of civilizations. I think that great leaders, great ideas unite societies and civilizations in a way that holds them together, and I think we have lost a great amount of that certainty in our culture and in our civilization, not just in the United Kingdom but across the broader West.
Matthew Taylor.
I mean, working in Downing Street, the only time I ever heard Tony Blair say he was wrong was when he once said he should have listened to himself earlier. So putting Blair himself to one side, do you think that kind of self-certainty is a good thing?
Well, what I think Tony Blair represents is...
I don't want to talk about Tony Blair, I want to talk about self-certainty. He always thought he was right.
I understand that, but I think it's important to qualify that he was very much a politician that, for me, represents position rather than clarity of vision and conviction.
It sounds like conviction's what you agree with, and lack of conviction's what you disagree with.
It is, but I think Tony Blair, as has been referred to, I think at length in terms of the politics of the third way and centrism, is the marker of that approach. He may have been very convinced of his own abilities, but yet the politics that he put forward were those of...
I'm just trying to clarify this. Are you saying that your definition of a conviction politician is a politician who, broadly speaking, agrees with you?
No, I'm saying the definition of a conviction politician is someone that has convictions beyond just the pursuit of their own position and aspiration.
Let's try someone else who's going even more, I guess, to the centre ground. The new Premier of Canada, Justin Trudeau, one of the first things he said when he became Premier was, I can't do things on my own, I need people to help me. It went down very well in Canada. Presumably you think he's a kind of unprincipled wimp.
I don't think he will be anywhere near as successful as his predecessor.
Because he asked for help?
No, because I think he is the kind of consensus politician that brings nations and civilizations into the doldrums.
But isn't it true that if you want to achieve change, you need to do it with people? Isn't one of the problems with politics that politicians tell us all the time, this policy is perfect, nothing can go wrong with it? And no policy, I can tell you because I worked in government, there is no policy that is absolutely right. There is no policy that doesn't have risk, no policy that doesn't have downside. You want politicians to say, I'm always right.
Well, Margaret Thatcher famously said that you don't move to the centre, you move the centre to you. And I think that is what leadership is about. I think we don't have anything like that kind of leadership, either in the United Kingdom or with Trudeau in Canada. And I think you're seeing that with the Syria vote today, and many other aspects of the policy process. As you say, they are very much based on expediency. They're not based on any sort of long-term vision, and they are therefore full of unintended consequences.
What you call expediency, some people might call responding to public concern. Some people might even call it democracy.
Yes, and democracy is a wonderful aim, and one that we don't really see enough of in the United Kingdom. But I think the problem with taking the consensus approach, if you like, is that most people want to elect politicians to lead, and they want to elect politicians that have a basis in their conviction that goes beyond just what the Sunday papers are going to read.
All right, I think we've got that one, Ben Harris-Quinney. Thank you very much indeed for coming this evening. And our fourth and final witness is Dr. Iain McGilchrist. He's a psychiatrist, a doctor and a writer. His best-known book is The Master and His Emissary, The Divided Brain and the Making of the Western World. So no ambitions there, Iain. Iain McGilchrist, do you have a theory about how brains evolve to cope with the battle between certainty and uncertainty?
Essentially, this is to do with the difference between the roles of the two hemispheres. It's rather an odd thing that our brains are divided. Most of everything that you've learnt about this you'd need to discard. I'm going to try to sum up in a soundbite the sort of
certainly are.
We need to be able both to pay very sharply focused attention to the world in order to get things, and we need at the same time to keep the most broadly open, sustained and vigilant attention to the world. In summary, we need two nexuses of consciousness, and that's why we have two hemispheres. And these two ways of attending to the world deliver two kinds of world, two attitudes to the world, two sets of values, two sets of goals. One is the left hemisphere is to manipulate the world, the right is to understand it.
Right, and broadly speaking, you could also say that those divide between certainty and uncertainty in the ways you suggest. I'm not asking you the question, I'm just summarising. Claire Fox, your witness.
I'm not going to talk about brains at all. It's interesting to me that in contemporary society we like to flatter ourselves as being rather sophisticated and not like the past where people kind of like were sheep and followed and we're all very well informed. But it seems to me that in contemporary period that we're living in, groupthink is well and truly alive.
I would agree with that.
Following a sense of certainty. But it's more that what is it you think that attracts people to want to conform to this kind of received wisdom?
That's a question that goes back a very long way, because I think that is a natural tendency for people who want to fit in.
But in contemporary society, it seems to me to have really gone quite far. And all I'm saying is it seemed to clash with this sort of, diverse society. We all know what's going on. We've all got in blogs.
I think what clearly is a clash is the clash between the view of ourselves as enormously liberal and the way in which there are so many areas on which it is almost impossible to express an opinion. So, in fact, there is a sort of dogmatism which is very unattractive, and that's one aspect of our culture.
Yeah, I think there's quite a lot in that. But another, we just heard somebody I thought rather well expressing the virtues of conviction politics. There's something quite attractive about that kind of certainty, it seems to me. I did think in comparison with, conviction-like pragmatist who kind of constantly goes out and does opinion polls to find out what he should think or she should think.
Yes, I thought it's interesting that Tony Blair's been an example, and I think I would agree with this, of both being over-certain about his opinions and having no convictions, in other words, deriving them from focus groups. And I think that a politician can be a politician of conviction without being a politician of certainty or dogmatism. And it's not. I'm not here to defend vacillation or unwillingness to adopt a position, but I think that the most dangerous thing, and here we do come back to hemispheres, is not knowing what it is you don't know and not being aware of it. That is what has led to a lot of misery in this world.
And that's the kind of part of doubt that most appeals to me, that sense of inquiry and so on. But on the other hand, how do you walk the line so that you don't end up in a relativistic mush? And so if you're trying to argue for scepticism, for a kind of open-ended inquiry, there is a danger that you just sound like one of those people who can never make their mind up and won't pin their colours to a mast.
Well, I don't think most of my friends would accuse me of being someone who has no views. I think the important thing is that one should have arrived at them. I think this was something that Professor Samuels was saying, that one arrives at them after a certain kind of journey of examination. And I think one should always have at the back of one's mind that one may well be entirely mistaken. So that is an aspect simply of being a human being. And I'm afraid that the sort of people who think that they are absolutely certain have caused an enormous amount of human suffering. My view is there is no such thing as certainty in this world at all. Physics tells us that, love tells us that, art tells us that, and everything in our human experience.
And McElvoy.
Well, I'm interested that you err on the side of saying that certainty has caused such misery, but surely if you look back over human history, we find just as many examples of people who've been driven towards the abolition of slavery, who fought great liberal, small L liberal causes, who are absolutely full of self-certainty. I mean, Wilberforce, Thomas Clarkson, these are people who went out there and they fought for something they believed in against the view of their society. Are you saying that they were just being a bit befuddled by their left brain?
No, I don't think they were at all. In fact, we haven't got time, unfortunately, to go into the brain aspect of this. But
you see my point. That
I do
actually
see.
certainty might be. I think you've given it a bit of a bad rap.
Certainly, I've given it a bit of a bad rap. No, I think that people who have convictions about things and feel passionately about them should argue for them and work towards them. But my problem is with people, it's a how-ness, as so often, rather than a what.
Can I just interrupt only for
Yeah.
time, because I think it's a very interesting thought came up, something you said before, and I thought it very interesting. Are you sure it's not just because, to put it politely, you are an intellectual? So of course you're very interested in the quality of arguments and you think that there's something superior now in that. But maybe a lot of people who are not in a cognitive sense as able as you believe in certainty and it guides them and they do good things because of it. The quality of their arguments might not impress you very much.
When two people meet who have different certainties, there is no dialogue. So it's very important that both parties are willing to hear the possibility of another point of view. And it comes back to that, the narrowness of view of the left hemisphere, which is dogmatic and actually tends to confirm its point of view when it's shown evidence that it's wrong, rather than the right hemisphere's take on things, which is always that of provisional.
But what I'm worried about is if you and I got into an argument, I'm only going to use this as an example, so let's not go down the rabbit hole, but if we were arguing about an intervention, like this great Syria vote tonight, or another very important issue where you had to come to a yes or no vote, and we disagreed, that it sounds like you would like to turn around to say to me, you, Anne, are in a left-brained culture because you have committed to a certainty that I, Iain, don't agree with.
Well, you've put words in my mouth that I don't accept, but what I would feel is that the issue of bombing Syria is a very good example of how enormously complex human situations are, how
you need to do it or not do it,
how
don't you?
very good principles that you may hold very strongly sometimes conflict, and how something that is good in one context is not good in another. The sense that things are a matter of degree, that they come in context, and that they need to be argued towards tentatively with an awareness of what one doesn't know is the essence of the difference between what I would call the right hemisphere take and the dogmatic left
Iain
hemisphere
McGilchrist, thank you very much indeed.
Pleasure.
Well, panel, there is quite a lot there to chew over. Not least, I sort of wondered what Iain McGilchrist would tell Katie Hopkins about her left and right brain. But
They're going down the pub afterwards.
maybe if they meet outside, they'll be able to talk to each other.
I mean, can I
about
start
it.
on that very point? Because,
Yeah.
I mean, the thing that struck me most about what Katie Hopkins said was that she doesn't need to think about things to find out her opinion. And on the other hand, Iain Gilchrist said, you arrive at views after a journey of examination. You have at the back of your mind that you may be wrong. Well, I certainly know which of those two worldviews I prefer, and it's firmly the Iain Gilchrist point of view. Katie Hopkins told us that she felt no need to be loved, which I thought was quite interesting. I wish I'd asked her whether she felt a need to be famous.
I think one of the things that's flowed through our conversation is this relationship between conviction and certitude. So one of the things that people have been wanting to argue, I think, particularly Andrew Samuels and Iain McGilchrist, is that you can have conviction without being certain. And then they say, as Andrew Samuels put it, it's about knowing in advance. You shouldn't know in advance. Now, I like that point, but I think it's quite a difficult one because I'm not sure in the end you can separate conviction from certitude.
Well, that's an interesting point. I mean, given that your political history, I mean, in terms of advising Blair, who you can say practically anything about from almost any point of view on these days, which was whether or not a certainty isn't something also that can be demanded of you. In other words, that people require you to express a certainty even if you don't feel it.
But I think that, well, that's in some ways one of my concerns at the present time is that we want morality to be very black and white. So although actually I had quite a lot of irritation with quite a lot of what the philosophers argued, I at least, this is the thing that I do think is important, is the complexity of things, I think has to be conceded. The reason I'm saying that is because
as
actually...
Andrew Samuels was saying.
Yeah, but also, as you indicated, at the beginning of the programme, things like young people saying, I need to have consent forms. I need to know, is it black or white? I need to know exactly. No, morality now is, and we go for cheap morality. You know what I mean? So at one point, Katie Hopkins said, yes, I do think ISIS are evil. And I thought, hardly a major moral breakthrough here, because I think broadly that's true. But it's also like paedophiles evil. But, when it gets complicated, like 19-year-old having a relationship with a 50, it all gets messy. But you're not allowed to say that anymore. And I think that kind of demand for certainty, and if you don't conform, you're a heretic, and being really put under the cosh to show you're certain, rather than say, well, I want to ask a few sceptical questions here.
I still thought, the reason that has appeal is that even while those of us who weren't agreeing with it, it had a commanding force. And that is what people are missing in the very clever, sort of philosophical argument that says, oh, it's all about the process and the quality of the argument and which position you put yourself in. And I know all these things to be true because I'm very interested in philosophy, but I was very, dubious about whether in the end we were going to have a retrofitting of a kind of doubt to sort of say, well, don't make this decision. If you're making it for the wrong reason. And I think that can end up being slightly patronising.
You were attracted to that, weren't you, Matthew?
I think part of this comes down. I mean, I thought Anne made a very strong point actually with Iain McGilchrist about the fact that people who don't want to intellectualise should be allowed to have opinions. But I think there is a difference here when it comes to people who make decisions on our behalf, or who seek to judge people on our behalf. So, if Katie Hopkins wants to have a rather peculiar way of viewing the world, that's up to her. What worries me about her is that she's given a national platform and her opinions have impacts on people. Politicians similarly make decisions which have ramifications for all of us, and therefore, politicians, it seems to me, should be praised for doubting, praised for sometimes saying, we don't know what the answer to this is, I can't do it on my own.
As Matthew Taylor has reminisced a bit about Tony Blair, can I just reminisce for a moment about Margaret Thatcher? Because, you might think on the face of it that, like Katie Hopkins, she always knew what she thought. And that is perfectly true. She knew what she thought about everything. And I admired her for that. But she knew what she thought about everything because they derived from absolutely firm principles which were based on her life experience. And so she always knew what to refer back to. And I must say, every time I come on the Moral Maze, I feel an envy for that, because I always have to think each time what I think about something, which she did not have to think. But it wasn't because she made snap judgment, was that the underlying firmness of her principles was what absolutely grounded it.
I'm not at all sure, Michael, that I understand that distinction. I mean, what you seem to be suggesting is that she did something instinctively that you can't do.
No, I'm saying that I think she had much firmer principles than I have, and probably most people have, that they provided an absolutely clear frame of reference.
But that takes
and the difference and the distinction I was making was that I think Katie Hopkins, on the other hand, arrives at opinions which are an entertainment.
But that takes me to that takes me to my worry about Ben Harris-Quinney, which is I think he confused conviction for ideological rigidity, and I think those are different things. And I think ideological rigidity causes many problems.
I think that's unfair, because I actually think that what's happened is that we've demonised ideological principle as a sort of unthinking, closed-minded rigidity, and we kind of celebrate sometimes people who haven't got any ideological principle and sort of say, oh, how flexible they are, and they're all being very thoughtful, and you just think, no, you haven't got an idea in your head. You've been a pragmatist. Don't be mad. But I wanted to actually, the nation, this will go down well, but I want to defend Katie Hopkins, because I think that we have to be very careful about saying, it's very dangerous giving her a platform because her readers, they're all going to be influenced by her. I mean, a lot of her readers, a lot of her listeners agree with her, and she's saying and expressing things. And this is a bit where I do have some admiration for the fact that she says, I say what I think, which is, there is a tyranny at the moment where people are frightened to say what they think. They're frightened that if they say the wrong thing, they'll be drummed out of polite society. She's actually got an element of bravery about her. Her motives might be all sorts of things.
I raised the Dolce & Gabbana case. Absolutely.
Exactly. The fact that she's prepared to say things that are unsayable and won't back down and won't, because people are now told you can't say that so often.
Can I just make a point that is, I'm not sure whether it's absolute bravery. I think that might be sort of stretching the concept. If you were, if you have a jolly nice job and a life out of it, then good for you. I'm not sure it's bravery. I think there are very few brave columnists other than in dictatorships, and none of us, thankfully, are there. So let's be a bit careful with the bravery thing. What I think is, I've been interested in tonight. I hadn't really thought about it at the start, but the more I listened to the witnesses and the arguments, was that we have this funny relationship with principle. And I think the idea of principle, which I got more attracted to the more I listened to the psychiatrists, was the idea that you might just have a disposition to think something, and that might be all right. And it might be that you didn't need therapy. Having said that, now then, at the same time, I can see the Labour Party was eaten up by this addiction to sort of Jeremy Corbyn's principled man, meaning that it doesn't matter if he's wrong and doing immense damage. So I'm now very conflicted about what we think about principle.
It's interesting that Jeremy Corbyn's principle is also leading to a kind of witch hunt type atmosphere in the Labour Party, in which
for those who don't share those principles.
For those who don't share those principles,
I think
which of course people would dispute.
Of course they would. But the interesting thing I think in this is actually the thing that people most want from their leaders right now. There's a different debate, of course, is they want authenticity. And they want to feel that leaders are speaking directly from the heart. But if you do speak directly from the heart, if you are authentic, you have to have doubt, because otherwise it is to imply that our leaders are a peculiar race of human beings who don't have any of the fears and doubts and concerns that we have.
Claire. Yes, I know, but now that we're assuming the people who have got a consistent, principled approach to politics, even if you don't agree with it, never think and never have doubts. I don't think that's fair either. But what we're all wary of, and which we see far too much of at the moment, is dogma. A repetition of a received wisdom without thought, without questioning, without any sort of self-reflection. That's dangerous, and there's far too much of it around at the moment.
And that is the point that I wanted to pick up on when I was talking about our morality being a matter of time and place. There is, I think, amongst many people, an assumption that what we believe today is the right thing, and that people in other places thinking different things are thinking wrong things. And I thought that Iain Gilchrist was absolutely on the right line in saying that the dogmatism is very, very unattractive. There's a natural tendency for us to want to fit in, and that is turned into a dogmatism, and it is turned into an authoritarianism too.
Well, thank you, panel. That's our moral maze for tonight. My thanks to the panel. Michael Burke, I think you'll all be glad to hear, will be back next week. Until then, good night.